Hi, my name is Luke, and welcome to the Cedar Log. On this week's episode, we won't be having an interview with a past chief, or we won't be talking about a council camp, or even the order itself. We won't be doing much of the talking at all. We actually have restored audio from the 1956 NOAC to where Dr. E. Ernest Goodman, our founder, talks about and challenges the order to keep on moving on and growing. So I hope you can sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
The size of that encampment, now mark you this, the size was 12 times the size of our National Jamboree. There were 603,000 men, 20 years of age and over, not counting the women and children. That's a pretty good-sized camp. It lasted, as we said, for 40 years. Why did it last so long? Those poor old fellows had so much to learn about camping, as I'll mention in just a minute. And in the second place, they had to live long enough to get rid of the older generation, which is also a very good thing. Look at some of the techniques in camping, and you can read this for yourself in the Holy Book, if you will. Some of the techniques in camping those old fellows had to learn. How to purify their water supply in detail, that's explained. How to live off the land, all 603,000 of them living in survivable fashion off the land. How to avoid food spoilage in the heat of the wilderness country in which they were camping, so as the Bible said, that it does not breed worms and stink. How to avoid contagion and infection in their camping. How to keep clean. And even, mark you, how to make their latrines. I'll have to verify that by quoting Scripture to you. The 23rd chapter of the book of Deuteronomy, the 13th verse, "And thou shalt have a paddle upon thy weapon. And it shall be that when thou wilt ease thyself abroad, thou shalt dig therewith and cover that which cometh from thee." The first latrine. They had a camper's training course that lasted 40 years. Not only, my brothers, in material things, however, in spiritual things as well. For there in the wilderness, during those 40 years, they built the first church. They called it a tabernacle, or a meeting tent of meeting, there in the wilderness. And there, from a mountaintop, from God through his servant Moses, there came the 10 Commandments. And so finally, after 40 years, they were ready in terms of their campcraft skills, of good living, and in terms of something still more important, what was in their heart and soul. They were ready for the promised land. Well, now, in this year of grace, we have come to the promised land, God granted. And like the ancient Hebrews, we've had to learn a lot of things in these last 40 years about the skills of camping. I remember back with some chagrin to my very first camping with boys, even before the Scout movement came along, and some of the crazy, ignorant things that we did while out in the wilderness camping. But little by little, Brother Klusman, we picked up the techniques. Thank you very much, sir. Little by little, we've learned the know-how, and 40 years have gone by, and we've had camp cooking and camp shelter and camp sanitation and camp health and safety and refrigeration and even camp discipline. And with all these lessons in... now, that's no joke. With all these lessons in the techniques of good campcraft, we've been learning also certain things of the Spirit, and that's where the order has come in. According to the 12 Scout laws, which are based upon those 10 Commandments, and how to come to a knowledge not only of nature, but of nature's God. And now, my brothers, here we are, about to enter, having already entered, as a matter of fact, the promised land, for the whole generation is past, and even our beloved national chairman has been called to higher service in those years that have passed. Well, like the leader of the Israelites, I can't expect to go very far with you into the promised land that lies ahead. But I count myself fortunate, brothers, to have come this far with you over the boundary of that promised land. But you're fit to enter, my brothers. You and your forebears in the order of the arrow have been getting ready for that promised land. You had the benefits of the lessons we've learned in the 40 years. You've dedicated yourself to the brotherhood of cheerful service, and you've promised to lead in service for God and your country. Well, now, since I can't go with you very far, will you let me give you this morning 3 things to take with you into the promised land that lies ahead, into which we have hardly entered, into this good land, but not necessarily an easy land. For the children of Israel, when they entered the promised land, have to fight every step of the way for some years to possess the land. And it was no soft pickings for them. Let me suggest, first of all, you take into the promised land that lies ahead with you the democratic spirit. For these are 3 things of the spirit I want to leave with you. The democratic spirit. Now, the Order of the Arrow was founded, as you know, I think, upon an old Indian camping ground. But the original planning for the order, the original planning was not done there. Do you know where it was done? It was done in Independence Hall, where the Declaration of Independence and the Charter of Our Liberties was developed, where our country was born, this great democratic republic. And that's where the order was really born. So, naturally, we stress the principle of democracy in the order. Don't overlook the fact that our great democratic principles is going to be subject to attack during the years ahead in this promised land. In fact, my brothers, listen to your founder for just this minute. There was great danger in founding the Order of the Arrow, in picking out certain select men in a troop or a unit and setting them apart. Let me mention just 3 great dangers that we have to guard against. There's the danger of the clique, a little self-contained group of people better than thou, who look down the nose at the other fellow, who, like the small kids, say, I got something you ain't got. That sort of a spirit, you know. I remember 2 small boys when our own family were younger, 2 small boys, neighbor boys, about ages 7 and 5, that got a new bicycle, just one bicycle between them. And they did their best to ride that bicycle together. It wasn't a very successful demonstration. And finally, the older fella said to the littler boy, you know, if one of us would get off, I could ride better. And there's a danger, my brother, that we may also inherit that spirit. If we keep some of these guys out, look how much better we'd be. The danger of the clique, of exclusiveness. Heaven guard against that danger in the promised land. Then there's a danger of the oligarchy. You know from your medieval history, ancient history, what the oligarchy was. A few people in power in the lodge or in society. A few people in power. And that's no way to maintain a strong organization or a strong nation. Yet it's so easy to fall into that situation, and I hope heaven spares us that danger. And then there's the danger of the boss. The danger of the boss emerging to hazard our democracy, our democratic spirit. A dictator running the lodge or a dictator running the land. They're both of the same breed, and we've begun to rid the world of dictators, but they keep cropping up on us from time to time, don't they? If it isn't a Hitler or Mussolini, it's a Perón in South America. I heard a Methodist bishop tell a story about a dictator. I told this down in Florida, I think, one time, which always appealed to me. It was in the midst of Hitler's high power in Germany. And he, with his field marshal, his Reich Marshal, Goering, were riding an automobile across the fatherland when, in the open country, near a farm, they hit a farmer's dog and killed the poor animal. "Stop," said Hitler, and they stopped. Goering, he said, "Heraus mit, and go by the farmer and explain the situation to the farmer and make all apologies." And Goering heraused and went inside and was gone 2 or 3 minutes, and pretty soon he came out and his arms were full of new-made bread and cakes and cheeses and a few articles of bottled goods. And the Fuhrer took a look at him. He says, "Goering, what's this?" He says, "I really do not know, mein Führer. All I did, I went in to the farmer, and I said, 'Heil Hitler, the dog is dead.' And they gave me all these things." Well, may the boss do likewise. But on the other hand, let me put it positively, brothers. May we cherish the democratic spirit positively in the selection of our members, in accenting the importance of each individual member, not letting none be lost in the crowd. How I would love to have been able to do that more perfectly in this gathering. But nothing gave me greater pleasure than to talk to each individual member that I had a chance to run up against. Learning in youth, in days of youth, how to manage your own affairs more expertly by actual experience. There was a country schoolmarm up there where I live who was trying to teach her boys and girls that idea of expressing themselves fully and in description. She said, "Now, boys and girls, I want you to imagine that you were trying to describe a horse to an Eskimo boy that never saw a horse. How would you do it?" One kid put up his hand. He said, "I would say a horse is an animal with a leg at each corner," and sat down. Another kid got up and said, "A horse is an animal with long hair at each end," and he sat down. And a little girl with an eye to beauty said, "A horse is white or black or brown." But the kid kept waving his hand back in the rear row, and finally she came to him. And she said, "Well, Johnny, what would you say?" He said, "I would say, come here, little Eskimo boy, and I'll show you a horse." When some, what's the name that they use now, egghead, says to me, "What do you mean about teaching young men to run their own affairs?" I'll say to my brother, the egghead, "Come to Bloomington with me," or its equivalent, "and I'll show you young men running their own affairs and running it to the Queen's taste." Let's remember that as we carry on with the democratic spirit. Oh, it's a precious thing, this spirit of democracy which is ours. Take it with you, my brothers, into the promised land that lies ahead. Another thing I'd like to call the volunteer spirit. It's very closely related to the democratic spirit. It's a blood brother. People must be willing to serve in a democracy. They should not wait until they're asked. They should be willing to volunteer for service. This summer I've had 5 grandchildren with me on the farm, all under 6, and all but one little girls. And I've had lots of volunteer service. I would go out to feed the goats in the morning, and before I could get near the place, little Becky would come along and say, "Grandpa, I'll feed the goats," and she opened the gate and let the goats out into the raspberry patch. And I spent a half hour getting the goats back in there to be fed. Or little Mary would come running out the other side as I went toward the chicken house. "Grandpa, I'll feed the chickens," and before I could get it, she'd been in there not only feeding the chicken, but scrambling the eggs. But the point about it is, wait until 10 years have gone by and the dishes are to be washed or the grass is to be cut. The tendency as we grow older is to shy away from volunteer service of that type. But the spirit of the volunteer is of the essence in a democracy such as ours, in a democratic movement such as the Order of the Arrow and Scouting. But it's so easy to get complacent as you grow older and to grow lazy. Remember this, Wes? Yeah. And to grow lazy and satisfied. I heard of a sunny morning down in the Tennessee mountains, way back in the Tennessee mountains, in country that nobody here comes from. Way back there, on a sunny summer morning, Pappy and his son, his grown son, were on the porch of their little shack, rocking away. Pappy was going like this, very gently like, and his little son, age 36, was going like this. And after some time of that operation, quietly, nothing spoken for a couple hours, in the sun, Pappy stopped, looked over at his son. He says, "Son, wherefore you wear yourself out like that? You're rocking again the grain. You learn to rock with the grain." Well, I hope you get the point. Way to wear yourself out is in volunteer service, not rocking with the grain. And the volunteer spirit is something precious. I mean the spirit of the man in our legend who says, "Here am I, send me." I mean the spirit of the person who will look around and see things to be done and then go and do them in the lodge and in the camp and in life. I mean the spirit, my brothers, of the person who, undertaking the job, volunteering his service for it, will see it through, come what may, in the way of discouragement or handicap or difficulty. A story has been written in the last couple of years that every scoutmaster and explorer advisor and every young fellow who's coming into leadership in the Boy Scouts of America, I think, ought to read. I read an abridgment of it in one of the women's magazines. I think it was called the Ladies' Home Journal, which I do not read regularly. The name of the article was Frightened Boy. Frightened Boy. It's a true story of a mother in America who adopted a war orphan from Latvia who had lost his parents, who had seen his playmates bombed to death, and whose soul was scarred by war. He was adopted and brought to America. The trial and the discouragement and the difficulty of that foster mother over a period of years with that 11-year-old boy as he grew up, maybe 10 years old when she got him, would have tried the heart of St. Francis of Assisi. It was a miracle what that woman did, but she never gave up. And I'm glad to report to you this morning that she succeeded, despite all handicaps, despite the things that tried the soul and nearly broke up the rest of the family. And the boy became a scout, and he became an Eagle Scout. And he went to the Jamboree in California a few years ago. For all I know, he may be here this morning. If he is, I hope he'll come up and see me after the meeting. Frightened boy whose scarred soul was healed because a woman volunteered out of the goodness of her heart, having raised her own children, to bring him back to health of body and soul again. I mean that kind of a thing, and I mean the kind of volunteer service that's done with a grin and a smile. It's a precious thing, my brethren. Take it with you into the promised land. Now, I'm almost through. But there's one more thing of the Spirit, of course, that you must take with you into the promised land. The years that lie ahead of you. The good years, even though they're tough years, they're good years that lie ahead. And that's the reverent spirit, the spirit of reverence. Now, the Order of the Arrow, as we all know, is a thing of the Spirit. And no thing of the Spirit is such at all if it isn't of the great Spirit. The order of the arrow is a thing of the out of doors, but no one can truly understand the out of doors without worshiping nature's God, can he? Reverence, my brothers, that thing we talk about in the 12th Scout Law, is more than a static thing, a state of mind. It's an active thing. Reverence for God or reverence for your fellow man. I was interested a few years ago to have a member of the order come to me and tell me how he had gone to Africa a few years before that with one of the world's greatest citizens. Some call him the greatest citizen of the world, a man named Alfred Schweitzer, who gave up all sorts of other things in life because the great motto of his life was reverence for life. And he looked all over the face of the globe to find a people for whom their fellow man had the least reverence, and who needed the most in the way of respect from fellow man. And he went to Africa, and so they gave him the Nobel Prize a few months ago, Albert Schweitzer. Reverence for life and for the welfare of your fellow man. It's something like the order has done with the American Indian, to whom our ancestors gave a very raw deal in many cases, in many instances, but for whom now we're trying to pay recompense in reverence for life as they live it and as they lived it back then. Now, reverence toward the fountain of life, toward God himself, is a thing that we begin to talk about in America now. We have put the words "In God We Trust" on our stamps. We have changed the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, one nation under God. But it must be more than lip service. I was in Paris a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and there I spent a day with my old friend Cedar. You remember him, the former national commissioner of one of the great scout movements in France. And he said, "Erner, I want to take you around Paris and show you a few things that the ordinary tourists don't see." And he took me to what he considered the most beautiful chapel in Paris, called the Sainte-Chapelle. We went into this small church built by one of the Louis of France near his palace, and it was a thing of tremendous beauty. The whole chapel wall seemed to be of stained glass. You could hardly see the stone divisions between the windows. It was a wonderful sight. It was awe-inspiring. There was a tremendous experience there. He said, "Erner, we people of France love this place. When we have a great convention come to Paris, even a businessmen's convention, we sometimes bring them here for a session in order that they may see the place and come to reverence the place that we respect, that we have in our heart. We bring trips of the school children of Paris to have an experience in this chapel, Sainte-Chapelle." And then he looked at me with his intent eyes. He's a grand soul, this French scouter. He said, "Erner, bear this in mind. As long as the heart of France is here, in this place, you need never fear that we'll knuckle down to the communists, because here is our heart." And so it must be with each of us, my brothers. Reverence must be a thing of our hearts, a thing of our own spirit, and without it we dare not enter the promised land. Well, there it lies before you, my brothers, this promised land, a good land because there's high adventure there. You may have a tough time in it, I don't know. I don't have the gift of prophecy. But it'll be a good land, a land of great promise, if you carry into it and maintain there in your lives, in your lives, in your experience, these three things of the Spirit: the democratic spirit, the volunteer spirit, the reverent spirit. Some of you heard me tell the story of a map they found, an old map, made in 1526. Now, if you subtract 1492 from that, you see America wasn't very old at that time, the New World, but this was a map of the New World, of the Atlantic coast of the New World. It was a very crude map. But the ancient map maker, fearing the worst about this New World, had written 3 legends across the ancient map, reading as follows. Here be great giants. Here be fiery dragons. Here be deadly serpents. He wasn't going to have anybody take any chance in this New World without knowing the word. Well, that map, with all its terrible legends, came into the hands of a scientist of those days, Sir John Franklin, who was also a man of reverence and faith. And he wrote one more legend on the map, probably the first map of the New World. Do you know what it was? His legend canceled all the other 3, for he just wrote, here is God. Here is God. And as you enter the promised land, you need have no fear, my brothers, for the great giant of communism or totalitarianism. You need have no fear for the fiery dragons of crookedness in high places. You need have no fear of deadly serpents, of prejudice and ill will among men. If in that promised land you have God. And may God bless you all.
Thank you again for tuning into this week's episode of the Cedar Log. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at our email or on social media. Thank you, and have a great day.